Hey church, this is Pastor Forrest, your youth and outreach pastor. I'm excited to share our PO3 devotional today as we look at 1 Chronicles chapters 14 through 16. I love these passages as we learn about King David and all that he was able to do and accomplish. And we see in these passages his kingdom growing. We see his family line growing and multiplying, but more importantly, we see the favor of God on his reign and on his leadership. And it's so cool that even while David had a lot of difficulties in his life, he had some shortcomings and some failures, he really is regarded historically as one of the more successful leaders of Israel. And I think there's so much to learn from King David. And that's why I want to point out just a few qualities today of King David's leadership that we can learn from. You see, in verse 11, David confronts the Philistines at Baal Perazim. He sees that they were raiding, that they were causing threat to the Israelites, and David could have made a rash decision in that moment. You know, he could have immediately confronted them, but what was the first thing he did? Well, he inquired of God. He consulted God to see what exactly was his will in that moment. And that's why my first thought about David's character and what we can learn from him is this: David was sensitive to the will of God. Being sensitive to the will of God is something I believe we can learn from King David. You see, reading on, we see that as David sought God's will, God actually delivered the Philistines into the hands of the Israelite army. And then we read on actually in verse 13, the Philistines, they attack yet again. And you know, David didn't become haughty. He didn't just assume because he had the victory last time that he'd get it again. But what did he do? We see again, he relied on God. He sought the Lord's will. And only then was he given victory. And that's why my second thought, simply put, is David relied on God. As David relied on God, not only was he handed victory and favor from God, but the God of Israel was glorified. The God of Israel was magnified. Was David celebrated? Was he given a lot of accolades? Absolutely, for sure. But David understood very clearly where the victory, where the empowerment came from, which is so important. We ought to rely on God in everything in our lives. And David goes on in chapter 16 to prepare a place for the ark, and he appoints Levites to minister before the ark of the Lord, to blow trumpets regularly, honoring and extolling the Lord. And that's why I want to point out here, David was reverent before God. This is something we see in his leadership. He always puts the Lord first. He makes an effort to bring praise to the name of the Lord before the whole nation so that all may know who the Lord is and that he is mighty to save. And you know, it's so cool that he was intentional to honor God for the victories that David was given. David was all about celebrating the victories, but he also was all about celebrating who God is just by himself as the Lord of all, as Yahweh. And I want to close our Devo today reading these few lines of a praise song to God that David instructed his priests to recite. This is in verse 8 of chapter 16 of our reading. And I want to challenge you to be sensitive to the will of God today, to learn from David in fully relying on God, and then to be reverent before God. That was my third idea. Be reverent before God, recognizing his worth, his value, his holiness. And so we want to learn from David in these things. But what better way, I think, to start our day than to just recite this prayer that David's priests would pray. So let's make this our own. And I'm so excited to read this with you and continue our day together. It says here in verse 8, "Give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done. Sing to him, sing praise to him, tell of all his wonderful acts. Glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and his strength. Seek his face always." Let's look to the Lord and his strength, not our own, seeking his face always today. Love you, church. Great being with you.